Have you ever wondered how a revolution actually starts? I mean, how do you go from being a loyal subject of a king one day to a rebel fighting for independence the next? Well, today we're diving into exactly that, the story of how a handful of taxes on things like stamps, sugar, and tea lit the fuse for the American Revolution. It sounds a little crazy, right? A tax on playing cards sparking a war? But this question, it really gets to the absolute heart of what we're talking about today. We're going to see how these seemingly small taxes on everyday stuff became the ultimate flashpoint in a huge fight over what freedom even means. To really get it, we have to start with the core disagreement. Because, and this is the most important part, this was never just about the money. Not really. It was a massive clash of ideas, a battle over power, over rights, and about who gets to call the shots when you're an entire ocean away. Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1763. Great Britain has just won a massive, incredibly expensive war. A war fought, in part, to protect the American colonies. Now they are drowning in debt. So Parliament looks across the Atlantic and sees the colonies as a brand new, untapped piggy bank to help pay the bills. From their point of view in London, this seemed completely fair. But, and this is a big but, the colonists saw things in a totally different light. For more than 100 years, they had mostly taxed themselves through their own local elected governments. This new plan from London trampled all over a principle they held sacred: no taxation without representation. The very idea that some faraway government could just reach into their pockets whenever it wanted? Unthinkable. It was a line in the sand. And this is where it's clear the two sides were practically speaking different languages. Britain believed in something called virtual representation. The idea was that a member of Parliament in London represented all British subjects, whether they lived down the street or all the way in Boston. The colonists, they thought that was nonsense. They believed in direct representation, that the only people who could tax them were the people they actually voted for from their own communities. There was just no middle ground here. So, with this huge philosophical gap between them, Britain decides to test the waters. In 1764, they make their first real move. You can think of it as a warning shot, really, designed to see just how far they could push this new power they were claiming. This was the Sugar Act. Now, on the surface, it was about cracking down on smuggling and raising some cash. It hit things like sugar and molasses, and it gave British officials a whole lot more power to search ships. If you were a merchant in a port city like Boston or New York, this was a huge deal. But if you were a farmer inland, you might not have even noticed it. So the reaction wasn't a full-blown rebellion. Not yet. It was more like a low rumble of thunder in the distance. But the message from London, that came through loud and clear. Britain was getting serious about tightening the leash and raising money, whether the colonists liked it or not. The stage was definitely being set for something bigger. Well, Britain completely misread that grumbling. They thought it was acceptance. So in 1765, they decided to double down, and they passed the one tax that would change absolutely everything. This wasn't like the Sugar Act that only hit a few people. Oh no, the Stamp Act was designed to hit everyone. I mean, listen to the official language. It sounds so formal and boring, doesn't it? But don't let that fool you. The impact was like a shockwave. This wasn't a tax on something you might import. This was a tax on daily life itself. And the sheer scope of it was just breathtaking. If you wanted to read a newspaper, you had to pay the tax. Wanted to play a game of cards with your friends, you paid the tax. Getting married, writing a will, going to college, buying property, suddenly almost every single piece of paper that marked a moment in your life required you to buy a stamp and pay a direct tax to the crown. And to add insult to injury, you had to pay for these stamps in silver coins, which were super rare in the colonies. Most people used paper money or just bartered. So this wasn't just a political problem anymore, it was a practical nightmare. The reaction was like a lightning strike. It was immediate, it was angry, and for the first time, it was truly united. Colonists organized massive boycotts of British goods, hitting the British merchants right where it hurt, in their wallets. There were huge protests, and groups like the Sons of Liberty made life, let's just say very difficult for anyone who was even thinking about being a tax collector. And right out of this fire, a rallying cry was born. 4 words that would come to define the entire movement, the entire era, really. This wasn't just a complaint anymore. It was a powerful declaration of a fundamental right. And you know what's crazy? It actually worked. The boycotts were so effective that British merchants were screaming at Parliament to do something. So, in 1766, they repealed the Stamp Act. This was a massive light bulb moment for the colonists. They learned a huge lesson. When we stand together, we can actually win. But while the colonists were celebrating this incredible victory, back in London, Parliament saw it very differently. For them, it wasn't a surrender. It was a strategic retreat. They hadn't given up on the idea that they had the right to tax the colonies. And sure enough, just a year later, they were back for round 2. I mean, just look at how fast all of this is happening. There's almost no time to breathe between these crises. The tension is just ratcheting up year after year, pushing the two sides further and further apart. It's like a runaway train. So this time, Britain tries to be a bit more clever about it. The new Townshend Acts put taxes on essential imported goods, things the colonists couldn't easily make for themselves. We're talking about stuff like paint, glass, paper, lead, and of course, the most famous one, tea. Now, Britain tried to play some word games here. They argued, hey, these are external taxes on trade, not internal taxes like the Stamp Act, so this is totally legal. Colonists basically rolled their eyes. They didn't buy it for a second. To them, it was simple. A tax is a tax. If we didn't vote for you, you can't tax us, period. So what did the colonists do? They dusted off the old resistance playbook and ran it again. Only this time, they were even better at it. Leaders like Sam Adams got all the colonies working together on new boycotts. Women played a huge role, holding spinning bees to make their own homespun cloth so they wouldn't need to buy British fabric. It was an all-out effort.
And guess what? It worked. Again. By 1770, Parliament gave in and repealed most of the Townshend Acts. But, and this is a really big but, they left one tax. Just one, the tax on tea. It was purely symbolic. It was Britain's way of saying, okay, you win this round, but don't forget, we still have the right to tax you. And that one single stubborn tax on tea, well, that would lead straight to a little event called the Boston Tea Party.
So when you look back at this wild decade of taxes and protests and repeals, you gotta ask, why did all of this matter so much? Because the truth is, the fight was never really about the price of stamps or a few pennies and a pound of tea. It mattered because these fights taught the colonists 3 incredibly important lessons that put them on the direct path to revolution. First, they learned that when they worked together, they were powerful. Second, they started to see themselves not just as Virginians or New Yorkers, but as something new, as Americans with a shared cause. And third, and most importantly, they decided that one idea, the right to representation, was completely non-negotiable. And that just sets the stage perfectly for what's to come. With the battle lines drawn this clearly, with this core principle now etched into the American identity, the question wasn't if there would be a bigger conflict. The only question left was what would be the final spark that lit the whole thing on fire.